Hello and welcome to Profit Visibility Lab. This week or today, we're going to be exploring together, switch cameras. We're going to be exploring together false volume. And this is when you scale and more is definitely not more, it's worse. And we are in the primary domain that we're operating in today is the demand constraint domain. So scaling amplifies what's broken. And so diagnosis precedes deployment. And when we talk about what we're doing here, what we're exploring as we look at patterns, we're using basically with the archetypes of scale, what we're doing is we're using pattern recognition to help us to locate constraints within our revenue system. Okay. And so revenue moves through a structured system. This is a streamline and scale operating grid that I built, and it's a visual depiction of the four quadrants through which your revenue system moves. Okay. First, we started spotlight, and this is where interest becomes demand. Where visibility creates demand. Then we move to the offer quadrant, and this is where interest converts to commitment. From there, we move to activate, and this is where we fulfill the promise of delivery. And finally, we move over to retain, where the value compounds into cash. But momentum is not a constraint. So we have to distinguish with what the constraint domain is. There are four primary constraint domains that we're concerned with when we look at pattern recognition for the purpose of diagnosing constraints within our revenue system: demand, conversion, capacity, and cash. The key thing to remember is that there is only one primary constraint at a time. There's one constraint at a time, the primary constraint. Now, the primary constraint domain location is what we need so that we can pinpoint the proper action. Movement is progression. Constraint is illumination. It is a limitation. And the constraint domain is the location where movement in the revenue system is distorted. Now, patterns signal and the map confirms. We don't guess. So here, there is a correlation between the four primary constraint domains and the four quadrants through which your revenue flows. And so spotlight is where the demand domain correlates. The offer quadrant is where the conversion domain correlates. And activate is where the capacity domain correlates. And finally, the retain is where the cash domain exists. Okay. Today, the pattern that we're recapping in the Archetypes of Scale series is false volume. And so in false volume, what we say is we look at a situation where perhaps revenue is declining, and we say we need more leads. That is the action that we want to take. Now, what that looks like, it looks like traffic increasing, ad spend increasing, outreach volume increasing, but the revenue stays flat and the close rate declines. So if we look at a structural scenario, let's take a founder who's at 1.1 million revenue. Spend is 25,000 a month, and the close rate is declining. Okay, just keep that in mind. So there's a signal breakdown in the demand domain. And what that looks like, the indicators of the signal breakdown are that the wrong leads, the leads that are coming in are not your ICP. The messaging across domains is not consistent. There's something that needs to be modified. The sales call time is increasing. It's taking longer to get the same result. Hence, the close rate declining. And then the no-show rate is increasing, maybe because these aren't the right fit leads. Demand is distorted, and volume is amplifying the fact that demand is distorted. The misdiagnosis here is the revenue is unstable. Since revenue is unstable, I must need more leads. Okay. So the deployment, the action that we take is we increase traffic. But the problem was signal integrity. Okay. Now, what we're looking at when we are exploring the pattern is we're looking at what was the response versus what was the actual origin of the constraint. So when we talk about we need more leads, there's a volume expansion. So we increase traffic, we increase ad spend, we increase outreach volume, we push more leads into the pipeline. But the origin of the constraint, the thing that's distorting movement within your revenue system, is actually signal integrity. Okay? The ICP alignment is not clear. The message is not precise. The qualification threshold is not there. And the lead intent quality is not there. In other words, you're getting people in, but they're not qualified and they don't have the same urgency, right? You're deploying here with volume expansion, but really the constraint lives in signal integrity. Okay. And this one is a little bit more complex because in this week's pattern, we're actually operating in the same domain. Both activities are in demand. There are other cases as we go through the weeks in the Archetypes of Scale series where we'll see where there are multiple domains at play. So you recognize it in one domain, you make a change in a different domain. That's common. But here is where it can be a little complex because you know it's demand, but what you're not sure about or the action that you took moved you into increasing volume, which really just amplifies the impact of the signal constraint. Because more leads, more volume without a clear ICP, with messaging and precision, is now resulting in a downstream system impact of a lower close rate, longer appointments. You see? So let's quantify the consequences of this misdiagnosis. So we had a baseline spend of 30 grand for advertising, 2,000 leads, close rate was 15%. You got about 300 customers, revenue per customer is 3,000, revenue is 900,000, CAC is 100. In path A, we scale with distorted demand, okay, which means the signal integrity has not been addressed. We're just adding more leads. So we spend 50 grand, we have 3,100 leads. The close rate is now 12%. The revenue is 1.1 million, and CAC is 134. Customer acquisition cost 134 per lead. Path B, we fix the signal first. So we keep the spend at 30,000. The close rate, and the close rate's at 21% because we addressed the signal. Okay, we addressed the signal constraint. And the revenue is 1.26 million, but the CAC is down to 71. Okay. Same capital, different mechanics. So in path A, we're looking at CAC of 134 and 1.1 million, but with path B, where we corrected the constraint, the primary constraint, we're at 1.26 and 71, much lower CAC, right? Path B, 126, 71. That is up 144,000 and lower CAC. Now, the cost of scaling the wrong constraint. Path A, you take 50 grand, you get 1.16. Path B, you take the same 50 grand, you get 1.953. When distorted demand is amplified, in other words, we did not fix the constraint. When it's amplified, revenue left on the table, 837,000. Left on the table. The cost of sequencing. The $837,000 gap does not stay in demand. Remember, we talked about system impacts. So the distorted demand scales, conversion weakens, sales fatigue increases, hiring pressure rises, cash compresses. The symptoms echo, but the constraint remains in demand. Now sit with that for a minute. So what do we do? What do we do? Pause the scale. We got to step back. Audit the demand signal. Clarify the positioning. Confirm the domain and the constraint, and then redeploy. The sequence determines leverage. Same capital, different mechanics. So then we get to a point where we have a choice. We can guess, which we do that a lot. We can guess at the constraint, or we can confirm what the constraint is. The crystallized reality map confirms the constraint, the primary domain of the constraint, the location of the constraint. And the snapshot begins orientation. Demand is not traffic. Demand is signal clarity. Signal precedes scale. Diagnose before you deploy. Thank you for thinking carefully.